Okay guys, so we're going to pick up where we left off in the spirit of the earth. So it's been a good book so far. They've been talking about stuff you don't learn in school, stuff that's kind of abnormal about the earth that you can find, and people won't really believe you if you just come out and say it, but people are starting to realize this earth has a lot more mysteries than they tell you about in real time, the fast-paced life. But okay, here we go. Second part of chapter 1. The frail old man looked distinctly bird-like. Japasa, Chickadee they called him, was dying of heart failure. Doctors could do nothing further, but even so they had advised him to remain in the Fort Nelson Hospital. Japasa, however, thought otherwise. As an anthropologist put it, he needed moose meat, wind, stars, his language, and his relatives, rather than the narrow white bed on which I had seen him perched cross-legged like a tiny bird. And so his grandson had brought him back to his people to die, back to the bush where his life and his dying made more sense. It was there in Athapascan hunting camp in northern British Columbia in 1964 that my colleague witnessed the majestic orchestration of this obscure man's death. Like most people in such circumstances, the old Indian proceeded to put his affairs in order. Strange affairs to Western sensibilities. In the days before the fatal attack, Japasa was heard singing to the wind and rain. Both were his friends from his youth when they had appeared to him as people in the course of his vision quest. To a boy of 9, out alone and intentionally lost in the bush, seeking an encounter with something of nature, the wind being and rain being had taken pity. They had come and put their hands in his, promising him their powers for the rest of his life. Power through song. They taught him how to reach them in song. Now that the old man had no further need of wind and rain power, he sang them to his bedside one last time to tell him he would soon die and they could leave him now. Likewise, he summoned the foxes, his medical animal, to give back their power as well. For foxes, he said, had appeared to him too, in that boyhood dream vision. One night by the fire, Japasa spoke softly of the encounter, so vividly one would have thought it had happened yesterday. He recalled how a pair of silver foxes had found him and taken him back to their den, where he had lived with them and their 3 pups for several weeks. As he spoke, his son leaned over and whispered an English translation for my friend's benefit. They brought food for my dad, too. They looked after him as if they were all the same. Those foxes wore clothes like people. My dad said he could understand their language. He said they taught him a song. In the course of the story, Japasa sang that very song. The boy's song, his power animal song, fox song. In singing it now for the first time ever in the hearing of other people, the man was realizing its vital energy back to its original owners, the fox people, his friends, a giving back of power held in confidence for many decades. The next morning there were fox tracks around the tent, while to everyone's astonishment a moose was spotted a short way off in a clearing, easily within gunshot range. People said the animals were coming around the old man to say goodbye to him. My wife and I have a friend, a physician who worked for a while among the Cree in northern Quebec as a general practitioner. He remembers how one winter the snow was late in coming and the effect this produced. The tiny Indian community became strangely agitated, yet he couldn't quite figure out the connection. Finally, he asked. His informant seemed to have difficulty framing the answer. The matter seemed so transparent it was hard to imagine anyone missing it. As it turned out, they were worried about the small burrowing creatures, some of whom would die without the snow-insulating effects. Both of these stories are relics, as it were, of a conception and discourse on nature whose fully antiquity is impossible to gauge through archaeological evidence and the universalness of this sentiments. Among hunter societies would argue for a Paleolithic origin. What is particularly remarkable is that beliefs and practices of this sort have maintained their appeal and vigor into modern times, despite having formidable cultural forces marshaled against them to Western sensibilities. Long since purged of such wildlife intimacies by the demystifying pressures of the agricultural revolution, Judeo-Christian teachings, rationalism, and the commercialization of the earth. Such stories seem charming and remote. They strike one as improbable on one hand and impractical on the other, even a little frightening if one puts one's mind to it. Talking or singing animals, not to mention singing wind and rain, are for us the stuff of fantasy. I am reminded of all so human, genial creatures of the rolling English countryside conjured up by Beatrix Potter, Kenneth Graham, and A. Milne, a world readily, fantastically open to communication with ourselves. As I write this, I wonder when I lost faith in that sort of world. Probably a few years before Japasa was having his final encounter with the foxes and the elements. But then I doubt that this Indian would have put much faith in Peter Rabbit, Reynard the Fox, Ratty, and Mole, or Winnie the Pooh, all of them bucolic, sentimental fantasies created in comfortable parlors, each of them mirroring human ways, characters, and foil fables, all of them compelling as people, to be sure, though inauthentic as creatures. Japasa was looking for something genuine, which is why he went to the source alone and vulnerable, without protection and without sustenance, renouncing hubris, the ultimate supplicant in a spirit of an ageless American Indian tradition. Japasa sought empowerment from something explicitly other than human, in the firm conviction that one's humanity remains incomplete and unhinged without it. 6 years after Japasa exercised his power song for the last time, singing them back to their wild origins, I began what has turned out to be a spiritual journey of my own, hoping to understand the terms and potency of that relationship he so perfectly embodied. I didn't know his story then. It would be many years before I was to hear it. In 1970, I began an inquiry into the nature of the relationship between the Indian and the land in North America. I had just transferred into graduate history from a program in graduate biology at the University of California. Merely by walking across campus and asking the history department if it would admit this disenchanted molecular biologist, it did with justified misgivings. I suppose it was my biological bent that sent me immediately into the esoteric realm of American Indian natural philosophy. My scientific background, plus the narcotic of the environmental movement, then in full bloom, American Indians were the height of the fashion in those among environmentalists and hippies. They were applauded for their nature wisdom and inherently conservationist ways. Then, as now, there was much nonsense, more wishful thinking than fact, being voiced on the subject by whites and even Indians. At the time, I found the slogans and bromides irritating and published my irritation arguing from historical evidence that the issue of the Indian land relationship, as we might call it, was far more complicated than a blush enshrinement of the generic amberid Indian as some sort of ecological guru. My initial article created an uproar, even drawings and improving Betty misleading editorial in the Wall Street Journal to my embarrassment. Various popular and scholarly broadsides followed. In the years since, I've continued to brood over the issue from the perspective of historian, ethnologist, and biologist, through of late, mostly as a human being shorn of such academic pretense, sensing himself orphaned from the earthly ways of this planet and wondering how this came to pass. I have begun to suspect that the animal connection or disconnection is, as it now more truthfully is, may hold a key to understanding my own vague, perhaps distinctively male sense of dissociation from the natural world. That is why Japassa's story, of the numerous ones like it I have encountered in ethnography of American Indians, draw me so powerful, though I confess I do not understand their full import and doubt anyone does. Still, I have witnessed enough stories to have become convinced that Japassa connection with the world through animals is a form of expressing a universal human urge. More than an urge, a necessity. Beatrix Potter, Kenneth Graham, A.A. Milne, C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, Joel Chandler Harris, and the countless other spinners of animal-human tales that have entertained, instructed, and even frightened children over the ages all spoke to a biological connection which has never bred out of us. The toy animals nestled in the crib, the animal pictures adorn the child's first book, the pet our children crave, as do many adults. Animals are still good to think, indeed essential to think, perhaps more than anything else in the world. They guide us in understanding and accepting ourselves and other people. Animals are fundamentally comforting. The mind is made out of animals. It has attended. In all the unspoken languages, it is their names for Japassa to retrieve those names from his subconscious and give them consciousness. He had to learn their songs, fox and wind and rain songs in this case. Each communicated its essential powers in song, a concept I find intriguing. So that was the second part of chapter 1. Let me see how much more is in chapter 1 if I'm gonna... No, we can't finish this today. It's pretty long. One more part, so we'll get caught up on that another time. The third part of chapter 1. Thank you for listening. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the reading. Bye-bye.